Robert Orlean and his partner in crime, John Streep, zipped through the murky waters of the Louisiana Bayou on a speedboat. These men were dealers in the illicit, but their specialty was not any kind of contraband you'd probably recognize. Orlean and Streep dealt in rare orchids, illegally poached from areas where they're considered endangered and sold to high-paying rare plant collectors. As any seller or collector knows, rarity is the hallmark of value, and what these two men would encounter in the swamp that day was truly one of a kind. The problem for this pair of greedy opportunists is that only one of them would live to tell the tale, and thanks to the SCP Foundation, the other wouldn't remember it for long. That's what happens when you have a dangerous run-in with a certain mean green, swamp-dwelling creature that doesn't take kindly to unwanted visitors. And no, we're not talking about a crocodile. Orlean and Streep continued through the swamp, keeping their keen eyes out for the flash of light blue that'd give away the orchids they were seeking. Little did they know, from the murky darkness between the reeds, a pair of big yellow eyes were watching them back. They were intruders in a stranger's land, threats, just like the bad man. They would need to be dealt with accordingly, or a grim history would repeat itself. The boat came to a halt as the two poachers finally saw one of the rare flowers they were looking for arising out of the muck. Orlean leaped from the boat and began wading towards his prize. The flower would fetch him and his partner a pretty penny if they could get it back in good condition. The motions were so well practiced for Orlean, so automatic, that he didn't even notice something was moving through the waters towards him. Gators and snakes were an occupational hazard for people like Orlean. He kept a revolver holstered just below his shoulder as a precaution, but the thing about to kill him was unlike anything he'd ever faced before. Just as his careful fingers curled around the orchid's stem, Orlean heard Streep screaming from the boat. He was frantically pointing at something just beyond Orlean, emerging from the reeds. Orlean turned and felt his jaw falling open in horror at the sight of it. At first it seemed almost like a waterlogged corpse. Thick, matted black hair, heavy with grease and muddy bog water, teeming with parasitic swamp life. Her skin was green and bumpy, like that of a toad, dripping with viscous green sweat that seemed like it could only be the byproduct of rot. But those eyes, those big yellow amphibian eyes, they were alive as they were inhuman. This creature wasn't a corpse, it was something else entirely. Her body cleared the water, standing at Orlean's height now and facing him eye to eye. She was naked, her dignity preserved by her long tangle of hair. Her body was human-shaped, except for her freakishly long, thin limbs. Her belly appeared visibly bloated or engorged, like a woman in the mid-stages of pregnancy. Orlean had never smelled something so foul in his entire life, which was mostly spent wading through swamps and bogs. She smelled like death itself. Streep was screaming for Orlean to climb back into the boat, but Orlean knew it was already too late. He reached for his holstered pistol, but before he could clear leather, the creature let out a horrific guttural hawking noise and spewed a stream of black goo onto Orlean's face. It was hot, sticky, and foul-tasting, like a kind of tar rendered from corpses. It plastered his open mouth and nose shut and began to suffocate him. He tried desperately to claw at his face and tear the offending substance away, but all that succeeded in doing was getting his fingers stuck. While Orlean suffocated and Streep screamed terrified obscenities from the boat, the creature just watched and smiled through rotten teeth. It was nice to see them panic, just like the bad man who'd come before. They were in the wrong. They deserved this. Orlean soon realized that nothing he could do would save himself. He'd spent his life in a dangerous profession and been lucky until now. But the Reaper catches up with everyone eventually. The last thing he saw as the world went black was this creature, this swamp woman, wading towards him through the water with a hungry look in her eye. She grabbed him on either side of his face and just held him there. What was that sound? Was it fizzling, like something was burning or even melting? She just kept staring and smiling with those awful rotten teeth. Robert Orlean went to sleep in her hands and never woke up. Back on the boat, a desperate John Streep was watching a scene that, if it wasn't for the later intervention of the SCP Foundation, would haunt him until his dying day. He watched his partner undergo a process that was somewhere between rotting and melting. He withered away in the swamp woman's hands, degrading into thick black sludge that she drank through her thirsty skin. As much as it pained him to leave his friend behind, Streep knew that there was no saving him now. All he could possibly do was escape with his own life. He pulled the ripcord on the boat's motor and tore his way back to the nearest township, the shape of the nightmarish swamp woman shrinking in the distance behind him. When he ran into the local police station, half mad with grief and fear, screaming about the monster that had killed his friend in the swamp, the police understandably detained him for further questioning. When his criminal history as a poacher was flagged up on the database, it became clear he probably wasn't leaving for a while. That's when a Foundation agent embedded in the department passed a memo about the case's strangeness up the chain of command, and a covert mobile task force was soon dispatched to the swamp in order to locate and capture the anomalous creature that Streep had claimed took his friend's life. After a few days of searching, the swamp woman was captured by the Foundation and redesignated as SCP-811 before being delivered back to a nearby containment site. Luckily for Foundation disinformation agents, the cover story was practically gift wrap for them on this one. It had been a dispute between two hardcore criminals, and as the saying goes, there's no honor among thieves. Streep had murdered Orlean over a pay cut dispute and thrown him into the swamp where his body was eaten by gators. A few falsified records and implanted memories later, and the Foundation was free to do what it pleased with SCP-811. But the swamp woman would prove to be full of surprises and contradictions. While designated as Euclid, the containment procedures for the creature were rather extensive for its own benefit. Like a lot of creatures who'd never existed in captivity before, it had very specific needs in terms of its artificial habitat. The Foundation needed to be on top of everything from the pH levels of its soil acidity to the optimal temperatures and humidity levels of its containment chamber, built to resemble the creature's natural swamp habitat. The swamp woman is mostly non-aggressive to Foundation staff, but certain precautions need to be taken in order to ensure everyone's safety around her. While she's largely humanoid, her internal physiology vastly differs from that of humans. Her veins and digestive system are non-functional. She consumes her prey by melting it into black sludge with the highly caustic secretions of her skin, before absorbing it back through her pores. The waste material collects in her stomach, which she then expels voluntarily through an action similar to vomiting. This is often used defensively or in hunting prey, as the unfortunate Robert Orlean found out. As a result, people working in 811's containment chamber need to do so in pairs and wear heavily sealed hazmat suits for obvious safety reasons. The creature also proved to be surprisingly intelligent. While not a genius by any means, it was no mere mindless animal. The swamp woman had an intellect and communication skills on par with your average feral child, the one that had been brought up and socialized in a relatively normal home before being turned loose and experiencing a decline in its mental and social development. Her words have a childlike construction to them, as though English isn't her native language, and she's still in the very early stages of learning it. She gave herself a name, I, and began to cooperate well with Foundation staff in exchange for having her needs met. Since being brought into containment, she's made a number of requests. These include some requests that have been denied by the Foundation, such as the regular provision of bovine prey for its chamber and a variety of fish from its native environment to make it feel more at home. However, there are some requests that the Foundation has approved, like a wooden hairbrush and a D-Class in a hazmat suit entering the room daily, in order to help wash her hair, often bogged down by the frequency at which her skin produces thick, caustic oils. In one particularly strange request, she asked for a turtle in a hazmat suit to act as a companion in her containment chamber, as she reacted negatively to the idea of having turtles as food. Sadly, this was one of the denied requests. SCP-811 was also involved in a few cross-tests with other anomalies, leading to curious results. After realizing just how dangerous SCP-811 secretions could be, Foundation researchers naturally floated the idea of using it on SCP-682 in its seemingly endless termination experiments. A sample of 682's flesh was successfully decayed by the dangerous mucus, so a larger quantity collected over a number of months was then sprayed all over the beast. It managed to reduce 682's body mass by 27%, melting its way through the covered flesh down to the bone. However, at that point, it was unable to decay further, and SCP-682 soon returned back to its normal state. Who could have possibly seen that coming? Right. However, a much more interesting and enlightening cross-test occurred with SCP-978, the Desire Camera. If you haven't already seen our video on the Desire Camera, it's pretty much exactly what the name suggests. A Polaroid camera that reveals the deepest desire of its subject. And the Foundation decided to test it on a large number of staff and anomalies, one of those being SCP-811. When a photograph was taken of SCP-811 just staring at the camera, the resulting photo depicted a human woman with the same height, build, and facial features as SCP-811, braiding yellow ribbons into her hair and wearing a blue sundress. The attending researchers felt this raised an interesting question. Were they looking at an aspiration towards humanity from SCP-811? Or was this a yearning to return to what had been before? There was only one way to find out. Conduct an interview with the creature itself. When the interview began, the researchers pressed 811 on some of her earliest memories. One of the key details she shared was regarding a mysterious man whom she claimed came to her before she looked like she did now, back when her skin was soft and pink. The bad man. He injected something into her arm, and whatever it was, it changed her, mutated her, took away her precious humanity. The first thing she remembered feeling after that was an all-consuming hunger, and then melting and devouring the one who changed her, destroying any possible answers as to who he was or why he did it in the process. It was a story of victimization and dehumanization so cruel and upsetting that researcher Watchtel, an assistant researcher attending the interview, actually threw up. Later debriefing interviews revealed it was because he had a daughter of roughly the same age, with long dark hair. If SCP-811 has any parents herself, we may never know. Such is the strange tragedy of SCP-811. Whether you wish to call her by her number, a nickname like the Swamp Woman, or her self-given name of Ae, will likely never know who she was before, as not even she knows now. It is an unsettling reminder that all of our grasps on humanity are looser than you think. Sometimes all it takes is one chance encounter to change who you are completely. Now go check out SCP-2845 Alien God Crash Lands on Earth, the Deer, and Minecraft World Destroyer SCP-4335 A Welt in the Crucible for more fascinating anomalous creatures.